Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're tackling high output management.
Oh yeah, a classic.
It's by Andrew S. Grove, and I think it'll be especially helpful, if you're looking to really level up as a manager,
For sure.
especially if you're in that middle management kind of spot.
Yeah,
Grove was the president of Intel,
right.
and he really saw it all as Intel went through these huge changes.
Oh yeah.
From starting out with manufacturing to getting into all that complicated software and computer design stuff.
Totally.
But what's really cool is that he took all those experiences, the successes and the challenges, and turned them into these practical management principles.
Yeah, and he doesn't just tell you what to do. He actually explains why. It's all based on what worked and what didn't at Intel.
I see. So there's this breakfast factory analogy he uses that I'm really curious about.
Oh yeah.
It sounds kind of interesting, but I'm not really sure I get how it connects to managing a team.
It's like a really clever way to make these complex ideas easier to understand. So, picture this, right? You have a breakfast factory,
Okay.
and it's cranking out tons of pancakes.
Right.
Your inputs are all those raw ingredients,
Hmm.
eggs, milk, flour, all that.
Right.
Your labor is your team working the line, mixing batter, flipping those pancakes, and your output, of course, is those beautiful stacks of pancakes ready to go.
Gotcha.
So Grove uses this to show that any business, or even just a team, can be seen as a system.
Okay.
You've got inputs, you've got outputs, and you need the labor to make it all happen. And the goal is to make that whole process run smoothly and efficiently.
That makes sense. But what about quality control? What if you get a bad batch of eggs,
Oh, yeah.
Are you just stuck with a bunch of messed up pancakes?
That's where the analogy gets really interesting.
Okay.
So he uses this example of a continuous egg boiler.
Huh.
This thing just pumps out perfectly cooked 3-minute eggs, one after another.
Oh.
Awesome for consistency.
Right.
But what if someone wants scrambled eggs? You're out of luck.
Ah, I see.
So even though the machine is great for output, it doesn't give you much flexibility.
So it's not just about making as many pancakes as possible, or eggs in this case.
Right.
It's also about being able to adapt to changes to different needs, even when you have a system that's designed for efficiency.
Exactly.
Right.
And just you wouldn't want a rotten egg ending up in your batter and messing up a whole batch of pancakes.
Yeah.
Grove says it's super important to catch those defects early on. He calls it finding the lowest value stage in the process.
Okay.
That's where it's cheapest and easiest to find and reject those defects.
So if we're thinking about software development,
Yeah,
catching a bug while they're still coding is way better than waiting till the software is already out there, right?
exactly. That's your rotten egg in software. Finding it early saves you a ton of headaches later.
For sure. So how do we make sure we're managing this whole system the right way, whether we're talking about actual pancakes or, a software team?
Grove introduces this idea of managing through indicators. These are measurable signals
All right.
that give you a glimpse inside what he calls your black box.
This sounds kind of mysterious.
It's just that system we talked about with the inputs, outputs, and labor.
Okay.
These indicators show you how healthy and efficient that system is.
So kind of like vital signs, but for your business.
Exactly.
So in our breakfast factory, indicators would be things like the daily sales forecasts, how much of each ingredient you have, or even what customers are saying about the pancakes.
You got it.
Okay.
But here's the key.
Right.
Those indicators have to measure output, not just activity.
Interesting.
So, in sales, it's less useful to track how many calls someone makes.
Yeah.
What really matters is how many deals they actually close.
It's about the outcome, not just how busy people seem.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So how do we actually use these indicators in a practical way?
Grove says pairing them up can give you a much clearer picture.
Okay.
Imagine you're tracking inventory levels at your breakfast factory. By itself, it's just a number.
Yeah.
But if you combine that with how many times you've run out of an ingredient, it tells a different story.
Interesting.
Maybe your supply chain isn't reliable, or you're not forecasting demand accurately.
You're connecting the dots.
Right.
Instead of just looking at each piece of data on its own.
Exactly.
That's really helpful. But what about the manager's role in all this? How can we maximize our impact on the team's output?
That's where managerial leverage comes in.
Okay.
It's this idea that everything a manager does should make the team's output better. You're not just doing tasks, you're shaping the whole system.
That sounds powerful, but I'm not sure I fully get it.
Think about how you spend your time.
Okay.
Grove actually broke down his own day as a manager. He focused on 3 things.
Yeah.
Gathering information, making decisions, and nudging things in the right direction.
Okay.
Notice he's not micromanaging every little detail.
Right.
He's using his time to create the biggest positive impact he can.
So he's more like a conductor than a player in the orchestra. But how do we get to that level of leverage?
He's a big believer in written reports,
Interesting.
not just for communicating with others, but for making your own thinking clearer and more disciplined.
Right.
He also talks a lot about delegation as a key tool for leverage.
Delegation.
But it's not just handing off tasks. It's about doing it the right way.
I've got to admit, I've struggled with delegation.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes it just feels easier to do it myself.
He has this great analogy.
Okay.
Imagine you hand someone a pencil and ask them to sharpen it.
All right.
Ineffective delegation is hovering over them, telling them exactly what to do. But effective delegation is giving them the context.
So like telling them, I need this sharpened for an important document.
Exactly.
Okay.
You give them the why, they figure out the how.
It's about empowering your team.
Yes. Not just giving orders.
But doesn't that require a lot of trust?
It does.
What if they mess it up?
Trust is essential, but it's not blind faith.
Right.
You keep an eye on things without interfering, offer guidance when needed. But ultimately, you're still responsible for the outcome.
Delegation is about making the most of your team's strengths, not just passing off work.
Exactly.
This is all great stuff, but how do you know how many people you should be delegating to? Is there like a magic number?
He suggests aiming for 3 to 6 direct reports.
Okay.
That seems to be the sweet spot for managerial leverage.
3 to 6, all right?
Too few, and your impact is too limited. Too many, and you're stretched too thin. You can't give each person the attention they need.
Finding that balance so you can support your team without getting bogged down in the details.
Exactly.
This is really helpful, but before we jump into organizational structure, I'm kind of curious about this dual reporting thing he mentions.
Yeah, that one.
Isn't having two bosses a recipe for disaster?
It sounds crazy, right? But he makes a pretty convincing case. So imagine you have a team of engineers at Intel. Should they report to the plant manager who's focused on the day-to-day operations? Or to the engineering manager who's all about the technical stuff?
That's a tough one.
Right.
They both bring something important to the table.
Exactly. And that's where dual reporting can actually work.
Okay.
By reporting to both, the engineer gets the best of both worlds.
I see.
Their work aligns with both the operational needs and the technical standards.
It's like having two mentors guiding you.
Right.
But it sounds like it needs a ton of communication and trust.
Oh, absolutely. It only works if everyone knows exactly what the goals are, what their roles are, and who's responsible for what. Regular communication is key to avoid confusion.
So it's not just about, like, magically having two bosses.
Right.
It's about making sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly.
And understanding the unique value each manager brings.
And using that to benefit both the team and the individual.
That's a great point. Well, let's take a deeper dive into navigating organizational structures and workflows, and how to maximize output in part 2.
Sounds good to me.
So we were just talking about dual reporting structures, and now I'm ready to tackle some more of these organizational structure ideas.
Okay.
Specifically, these hybrid organizations that Grove talks about. I'm curious, what makes them unique? How do they actually work?
It's like finding this balance between being super specialized and being able to react quickly.
Okay.
You know, as companies grow, they always face this tension.
Yeah.
Do you focus on building deep expertise in these like specialized teams?
Right.
Or do you prioritize being flexible and adapting quickly to changes in the market?
That makes sense.
Hybrid organizations try to do both.
So it's not like an either situation.
Right.
It's about finding that middle ground between these two things that seem like they're pulling in opposite directions.
Exactly.
Can you give me an example of what that looks like in real life?
Think back to our breakfast factory. Imagine you have like locations all over the country.
Okay.
Should headquarters make all the decisions? You know, from the menu to the marketing.
I see what you're saying.
That might be efficient in terms of control,
Yeah.
but you might not be as responsive to what people in different areas actually want.
Right. Like what people want in one place might be totally different from what people want somewhere else.
Exactly.
So a completely mission-oriented structure where every branch is totally independent, that wouldn't work either, would it?
You got it.
It would be too fragmented.
Right. With the hybrid approach, you realize that some things are better handled centrally.
Makes sense.
Like maybe you buy ingredients in bulk to get a better price.
Yeah.
Or you set quality standards that everyone has to follow.
Right. The things that need to be consistent across the board.
Exactly.
Okay.
But other decisions, like what's on the menu or how you market locally,
Yeah.
those are better left to the individual branches.
So you're giving decision-making power to the people who are closest to the situation. The people who are best equipped to make the call.
That's the idea.
That's a really nuanced approach. Does Grove give any real-world examples of companies that have actually made this work?
Intel's a great example.
Oh, interesting.
They have these functional units like engineering and manufacturing. They provide services to all the business units.
Okay.
And those business units focus on specific product lines.
So they're leveraging their expertise across the whole company,
Right.
but they're still able to be flexible and respond to changes in the market.
It's that balance we were talking about.
It's like a balance between having that centralized knowledge and then taking decentralized action.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That's really fascinating. Now, I know we talked about dual reporting a bit earlier, but how does that fit into this hybrid model?
Dual reporting can actually make things clearer and more effective.
Really?
Yeah, it helps align someone's work with both their functional expertise and the specific needs of their business unit. For example, Grove talks about how Intel used dual reporting for their plant security personnel.
Plant security. Interesting.
So these people reported to both the plant manager.
Who obviously knows the security needs of that specific facility.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they also reported to a central security manager, who's responsible for security standards across the whole company.
So you're making sure that both the day-to-day security and the bigger picture security are covered
You got it.
without creating silos or conflict.
Right. Everyone's working together.
But doesn't that dual reporting structure require a ton of trust and communication?
Absolutely.
Like, everyone has to be on the same page.
It only works if everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, who's responsible for what, and what the overall goals are. Regular communication is essential.
Otherwise, it just turns into chaos.
Right. You could have conflicting priorities and a lot of frustration.
So it's not some magic solution.
Yeah.
It's a tool that you have to implement carefully and pay attention to.
Exactly.
But if you do it right, it seems like it could really help both individuals and the team as a whole.
It can.
Now, thinking back to managerial leverage,
Yeah.
how does this hybrid structure, along with dual reporting, impact a manager's ability to, get the most output?
That's a great question.
Because in these hybrid organizations,
Yeah.
managers have to be even more strategic about how they use their time and energy.
To do.
And I would think that dual reporting would actually increase managerial leverage if it's done well.
They can.
But how does that work? Wouldn't having to manage relationships with two sets of reports actually add more work?
Think of it like this.
Okay.
In the case of that plant security officer,
Hmm.
the plant manager can focus on the day-to-day stuff,
Yeah.
while the central security manager can provide guidance on the company's overall policies and best practices.
So instead of one manager trying to do everything,
Right.
they're each using their strengths and knowledge to support each other.
Exactly.
That makes sense. You're creating a system where everyone can focus on what they do best, and they're not getting bogged down with tasks that are outside their expertise.
Exactly.
It's a much more efficient way to use everyone's time and resources.
It is.
And that frees up both managers to focus on the things that really matter,
Yeah.
the things that will have the biggest impact.
Exactly.
Okay, so dual reporting isn't just about having two bosses.
No, it's not.
It's about strategically using people's expertise, working together, and ultimately maximizing output.
For both the individuals and the team.
Exactly. Okay, but navigating these complex structures is just one part of the equation. Let's move on to another key aspect of management that Grove really emphasizes: performance appraisals.
Oh, yeah. That's the one that managers and employees often approach with a mix of anticipation and dread.
He doesn't sugarcoat it.
He doesn't.
He admits that performance reviews can be awkward, uncomfortable, even make you anxious. But he's also adamant that they're absolutely essential for good management. Why does he think they're so important?
Grove is very clear. The main purpose of a performance review is to help the subordinate get better.
It's not about punishing them, venting frustrations, or stroking egos. It's about having an honest conversation that leads to real improvement.
So it's about feedback that helps them grow and develop,
Right.
not just judging them for what they did in the past.
Exactly.
I could see how that would make things less scary for both people involved.
It can.
He also talks about giving task-relevant feedback. Could you remind me what that means?
It's all about giving specific feedback that's directly tied to the task at hand.
Okay.
So instead of just saying, good job,
Yeah.
you might say something like, I really appreciated how you explained the technical stuff to the client in that presentation.
Okay.
It helped them understand what we were offering.
So you're giving concrete examples,
Yeah.
highlighting what went well and where there might be room for improvement.
Exactly. It's actionable feedback.
The person can actually use it to get better,
That's the point.
not just vague praise or criticism,
Right.
but real insights they can put into practice.
But how do you actually assess performance in a way that's objective and fair?
Grova says you should look at both output measures. Those are the tangible results of someone's work,
Okay.
and internal measures, which are more about their behavior, skills, and how they contribute to the team.
So you're looking at what they achieve and how they achieve it.
That's a good way to put it.
The results and the process.
It's
It's a
a-
more well-rounded view of performance.
It is.
I like that.
So like meeting a sales quota might be an output measure,
Mhm.
while being able to work well with colleagues or taking initiative might be internal measures.
You're recognizing that performance is multifaceted?
Yeah, it's not just one thing.
That makes sense. But how do we make sure we're not letting our own biases get in the way when we're assessing those internal measures? Because those are more subjective
Right.
than the concrete output metrics.
That's where the judge and jury analogy comes in.
Oh, I remember him talking about that.
You need to assess someone's performance against standards that everyone agrees on. That's the judge part. But you also need to deliver that assessment in a way that's helpful, like a jury giving a verdict with context and reasons.
It's not just about giving them a grade.
Right.
It's about helping them understand where they stand and how they can improve.
Exactly.
It's a much more collaborative approach.
It is.
And Grove also talks about total listening.
Yes. That's so important.
You really have to understand the subordinate's perspective.
You do.
Hear their thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
And make it a safe space for open and honest conversation.
It's about building that trust and rapport.
It's not just a top-down critique. It's a
Right.
two-way dialogue.
Exactly.
But I can imagine that giving constructive criticism, even when you have good intentions, can be tough.
It can be.
How do you get past that awkwardness and anxiety?
It takes practice. But if you remember the things we talked about,
Yeah.
focusing on improvement, giving task-relevant feedback, and creating that safe space for dialogue, you can actually turn performance appraisals into something valuable, an opportunity for growth and development.
It's about changing how you think about the whole process.
It is.
Shifting from judging to helping people grow.
Exactly.
Before we move on, I want to talk about something that really stood out to me. Grove's sports analogy.
Oh, yeah, he uses that a lot.
He does. Why do you think he uses that comparison so much?
It's a great way to show how important it is to set goals, embrace competition, and strive for excellence.
Okay.
Just like in sports, you have clear objectives. You want to win, and you're always practicing and trying to get better.
Right.
And we can apply those same ideas to work.
But some people might say that work isn't a game.
Yeah.
It's about getting things done, not winning or losing.
I think Grove's point is not to turn the workplace into some cutthroat competition.
Okay.
It's about tapping into what motivates people. We naturally want to strive, to achieve, to compete, even if it's just against ourselves or our previous best.
It's that drive to push ourselves. And by tapping into that, we can achieve amazing things.
Yes.
So it's about channeling that competitive spirit in a healthy and productive way.
Right.
Setting ambitious goals, pushing ourselves to improve, and celebrating achievements.
Both individual and team achievements.
But doesn't that risk creating a toxic environment where everyone's comparing themselves to each other and feeling pressured to outperform everyone else?
That's a good point. And that's why balance is so important.
Okay.
It's not about pitting people against each other. It's about creating healthy competition
Right.
where everyone's motivated to do their best,
Yeah.
but you still have a supportive and collaborative environment.
It's that sweet spot between competition and collaboration.
Exactly.
Okay, I get it. But before we get too caught up in winning, let's talk about something that really emphasizes individual differences. Grove's idea of task-relevant maturity, or TRM as he calls it.
Oh yeah, TRM.
Can you explain what that is and why it's so important for being an effective manager?
Task-relevant maturity recognizes that people have different levels of experience, competence, and confidence when it comes to specific tasks.
Okay.
And how you manage someone needs to take that into account.
So you're not treating everyone the same.
Right.
You're adapting your approach based on their individual needs and skill level.
Exactly. For someone with low task-relevant maturity, you need to be more directive.
Okay.
Give them clear instructions and supervise them closely. Remember that sharpening the pencil analogy.
Yeah.
For someone with low TRM, You need to be the one holding the pencil and showing them exactly how to do it.
You're providing the support and guidance they need
Right.
until they develop the skills and confidence to do it on their own.
Exactly.
And as their TRM increases,
Yeah.
you can start involving them more in decision-making.
Right.
And giving them more autonomy.
And for those with high TRM,
Yeah.
minimal involvement is best.
Just let them do their thing.
Trust them to get it done. Give them the resources and support they need. But step back and let them shine.
Empowering the people who are ready for it.
Right.
And supporting those who are still developing.
Exactly.
But how do you figure out someone's TRM? Is it just like a personality trait, or does it change over time?
It's not fixed.
Okay.
It can be different for different people.
Yeah.
And even for different tasks.
So someone might be really skilled in one area,
Right.
but a total beginner in another.
Exactly.
And your management style needs to reflect that.
It does.
So it's fluid.
Yeah.
And you need to be constantly observing and assessing your team members.
You need to understand their strengths and weaknesses.
What they need to work on, and then adjust your approach accordingly.
Exactly.
You can get a sense of their TRM by observing them,
Yeah.
looking at how they've performed in the past,
Right.
and even just asking them how comfortable they feel with certain tasks.
That's a good idea.
It's all about communication.
Yeah.
And being willing to adapt.
Exactly.
Well, we've covered a lot in this deep dive into high output management. We've talked about hybrid organizations, dual reporting, performance appraisals, that sports analogy, and now task relevant maturity. I'm excited to get to the final part of our discussion
Yeah.
and talk about how we can actually apply all these principles to our own work.
Sounds good to me.
All right, welcome back to our final segment on high output management.
It's amazing how much we've covered already.
It is, from those breakfast factory analogies to navigating hybrid organizations, even though sometimes dreaded performance appraisals. But I'm ready for those last few gems of wisdom from Grove.
Okay.
What are some of those takeaways that we can actually put into practice right away?
One thing that really stands out is his emphasis on what he calls the output-oriented approach.
Output-oriented. What does he mean by that exactly?
It's all about focusing on results,
Okay.
delivering tangible value.
Right.
It's not about how busy you seem
Yeah.
or how many hours you work, how many emails you send. It's about what you actually achieve.
So it's not about just being busy. It's about making a real impact.
Exactly. It's about measuring your work against objective standards
Okay.
and always trying to improve your output, your contribution to the overall goal.
This reminds me of managerial leverage. It's not enough to just work hard. It's about working smart and making sure your efforts are actually making the team's output better.
They're definitely connected.
Yeah.
Managerial leverage is about using your time and energy in the best way possible to maximize your impact as a manager.
Right.
And the output-oriented approach is how you do that.
So you're constantly asking yourself, what am I doing that's really making a difference? What's having the biggest impact on our goals?
Exactly.
And then focusing your energy on those things.
Yes. And that often means shifting your mindset,
Okay.
moving away from just doing tasks to focusing on achieving results.
I'm seeing how all these ideas fit together.
Yeah.
It's a way of thinking about your role and your impact.
Absolutely.
Not just a bunch of random tips.
Right.
And another key part of this is creating a culture of continuous improvement.
He talks a lot about that.
How do we actually do that? How do we create that kind of culture?
It's about embracing feedback,
Okay.
learning from mistakes, always looking for ways to do things better, more efficiently, more effectively.
Gotcha.
It's about fostering a growth mindset.
So people see challenges as opportunities to learn and grow.
Exactly.
You're moving away from that fear of failure.
Yeah.
And embracing the idea that we can always get better.
Both individually and as a team.
It's about acknowledging that we don't have all the answers
Right.
and that there's always room for improvement. And that means being willing to experiment, take risks, and see setbacks as learning experiences.
That's a great way to put it.
It's about creating an environment where people feel safe to try new things, to push boundaries,
Yeah.
and to know that it's okay to make mistakes.
You won't be punished for not being perfect.
That's so important.
It is.
And speaking of creating a positive and productive environment, Grove also talks about the importance of clear communication.
Oh, yeah. Communication is key.
It is, in any team setting. How does he specifically address communication within this whole high output management framework?
He sees it as essential for any high-performing team.
Okay.
It's about making sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
Understanding the goals, their roles, and how their work fits into the bigger picture.
Right. So everyone knows what they're working toward.
Exactly. And it's about giving and receiving feedback effectively. in a way that's both helpful and respectful.
So it's not just about talking, it's about really listening.
Yes.
It's about creating that open and honest dialogue.
Where people feel comfortable sharing ideas,
Right.
asking questions, and raising concerns without being afraid of being shut down.
It's about creating that psychological safety.
Exactly.
That people can speak their minds, even if they disagree. That can make a huge difference in terms of performance and innovation.
They can.
But how do we actually build that trust and rapport, especially in today's crazy, busy work environments?
It all starts with building genuine connections.
And that starts with trust.
Exactly. But you can't just demand trust. You have to earn it.
So how do we as managers actually do that?
Be consistent in your actions and your words.
Okay.
Be transparent in your decision-making and communication.
So people know what's going on and why.
Right.
And treat everyone fairly and with respect.
No matter what their position is or how they're performing.
So it's not about being everyone's best friend.
No.
It's about being a leader they can count on. Someone who has their back and will support them, even when things are tough.
That's a good way to put it.
It's about creating an environment where people feel safe to be themselves, to take risks, to make mistakes, and to know that you'll be there for them.
Exactly.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
It's about creating a sense of belonging where everyone feels valued.
And like they're part of something bigger.
As we wrap up this deep dive into high output management, what are some key things that our listeners can take away and apply to their own work, whether they're experienced managers or just starting out?
I think the most important thing is to remember that management is a skill you can learn.
It's not something you're just born with.
Right. It's not about some magical talent.
Mm.
It's about understanding the principles, developing good habits, and always trying to get better.
You're always learning and growing.
Exactly.
And adapting to the changing workplace.
And by focusing on results.
That output-oriented approach.
Yes.
Creating a culture of continuous improvement, building trust, communicating clearly, and seeking feedback.
You can become a really effective manager, no matter what industry you're in or how much experience you have.
It's about giving people the power to take ownership of their own development.
And their impacts on the team.
I can see why high output management is still so relevant today.
It's timeless.
It's not about quick fixes or fads. It's about those timeless principles grounded in common sense, clear thinking, and a deep understanding of what motivates people.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into high output management. We've explored a lot. From understanding how production works to maximizing managerial leverage, motivating teams, fostering continuous improvement, and building trust. We encourage you to think about these ideas, try them out in your own work, experiment, and most importantly, never stop learning and growing as a manager and a leader. Until next time, keep diving deep.